Okay, gotta figure this out. Share my desktop. Okay, Crime Lab Scandal, Annie Dookhan case by me. Annie Dookhan case. Annie Dookhan was a chemistry 2 analyst at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health Drug Abuse Lab. In June 2011, an evidence officer at the lab realized there was a discrepancy with Annie Dookhan. She had improperly taken 95 samples from the evidence storage to be tested. That was what originally caught the evidence officer's attention, and then further investigation led to backlogging initials and times that samples were taken out. And it was eventually found that these 95 samples weren't the only ones that she had taken without an officer being present. An investigation followed that led to Dookhan getting interviewed by the Massachusetts State Police about the last couple months of her work. The interview happened in 2011, the month of December. The investigation started only after the Massachusetts State Police took over the lab. The Massachusetts State Police took the lab from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Dookhan eventually admitted in a police interview to taking evidence from the evidence storage locker without an officer present, forging initials on evidence logs and quality control logs, batching similar looking samples together and only testing one of them. Then when that one came up positive, she marked the whole batch as positive, also known as dry labbing. Dookhan was completing around 500 cases per month, which was about 5 times more than her fellow analysts in the lab. Those fellow analysts had previously notified supervisors about her caseload being so much more than theirs, but nothing was done or investigated until the evidence officer made a point in June 2011. Dookhan was suspended from the lab itself and the lab work, but she was still allowed to testify in court until February 2012. In that year of 2011, roughly 30,000 cases were affected by her negligence and breach of standards and protocol, leading to a $14 million settlement for the affected defendants. ISO 17025 standards went off of the 2017 copy. The ISO 17025 standards are the main international standards that apply to the accreditation of forensic testing laboratories. The standards allow laboratories to uphold proper laboratory governance and competence in their testing. Numerous requirements of this set of standards were neglected, and the lab was found in non-compliance in the case of Annie Dookhan. To the right here, I listed my 6 standards that stuck out to me that this lab was in non-compliance with. So it was 4.1, 6.2, 7.7, 7.8, 7.9, and 8.7. For 4.1, it was impartiality, specifically 4.1.3. And in all these standards, I've underlined what specifically was what the lab was in non-compliance with. The laboratory shall be responsible for the impartiality of its laboratory activities and shall not allow for commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise impartiality. So Annie Dookhan gave into the pressures of the high workload given in most forensic laboratories. Forensic laboratories across the United States have a very large workload and a lot of cases from previous years or months that haven't been analyzed yet. Since her workload was small the year before, or even a couple years before, I think it was 2008 to 2011, her workload was significantly lower than what it should have been. This pressure probably, I don't know what was going on in her mind, but I'm sure it put pressure on her to get more done. It's because of this pressure that she made the wrong decision that led to her actions. Laboratory governance is important because, especially in this instance, some protocol or standards should be made known that even though there's a large workload, that doesn't mean any steps should be skipped or standards shouldn't be followed. It's not the analyst's fault that there's such a large workload. A laboratory should be in compliance with this standard by assuring each analyst and person working in a lab cannot have any career, commercial, or financial gain by completing as many cases as possible. So again, restating what I said. The forensic science field as a whole seems to have a large load of cases upon cases, which makes this standard even more important to be followed. All results should be tested following protocol and standards put forth by ISO. 6.2 personnel, specifically 6.2.1. All personnel of the laboratory, either internal or external, that could influence the laboratory activities shall act impartially, be competent, and work in accordance with the laboratory's management system. In this case, Annie Dookhan acted on her own success and excel. Although the laboratory's management system may have been slightly flawed, it still was in place and she did not follow it. Instead, she wanted to push more cases out than her coworkers for possible career progression. The backlogging in the evidence room was also a breach of the laboratory's management system. Resulting the evidence samples in batch results is an example of an analyst doing the exact opposite of acting with impartiality. By this, I mean she was trying to push as many samples out as she possibly could, disregarding whether the results were correct, and she got those results in the way of following protocol, which she did not. These actions resulted in the laboratories in compliance with this standard. 7.7, ensuring the validity of results. Specifically 7.7.1, the laboratory shall have a procedure for monitoring the validity of results. The resulting data shall be recorded in such a way that trends are detectable, and where practicable, statistical techniques shall be applied to review the results. This monitoring shall be planned and reviewed and shall include, where appropriate but not limited to, use of reference materials or quality control materials, use of alternative instrumentation that has been calibrated to provide traceable results, functional checks of measuring and testing equipment, use of check or working standards with control charts where applicable, intermediate checks on measuring equipment, replicate tests or calibrations using the same or different methods, retesting or calibration of retained items, correlation of results for different characteristics of an item, review of reported results, intra-laboratory comparisons, and testing blind samples. Annie Dookhan admitted to forging initials on quality control reports, directly fails the 7.7.1 ISO standard, specifically where it says use of reference materials or quality control materials and intermediate checks on measuring equipment. Additionally, the standard in parts I and J in 7.7.1 states that a review of reported results and comparisons should be made in regard to the testing and results. Annie Dookhan's results were not reviewed. If they were, her actions would have been caught sooner than they had been. Also, if comparisons were made between her fellow analysts at the same lab or even external comparisons, a number of cases she was completing would have been caught and raised a red flag when compared to everyone else. The validity of the results she produced was not monitored, therefore the lab was in non-compliance with ISO 17025 7.7. 7.8, reporting of results. specifically 7.8.2. The results shall be provided accurately, clearly, unambiguously, and objectively, usually in a report, and shall include all the information agreed with the customer and necessary for interpretation of the results, and all information required by the method used. All issued reports shall be retained as technical records. The results provided by Annie Dookhan were not provided accurately. Instead, they were provided in a batch. Although she probably reported them individually, if she had made a proper report on her methods on how she got the results, it would have been seen that the samples actually were never tested. Should not process each evidence sample by itself and follow procedure. 7.8.1, which comes before the 7.8.2, states the results shall be reviewed and authorized before release. So if her results were reviewed and authorized before released, someone would have caught on that she was having way too many positives. She was getting way too many results in a short amount of time, and this would have been caught. 7.9, complaints. Specifically 7.9.1 and 7.9.3, the laboratory shall have a documented process to receive, evaluate, and make decisions on complaints. That is 7.9.1, and then 3 is the process for handling complaints shall include at least the following elements and methods. Description of the process for receiving, validating, investigating the complaint, and deciding what actions are to be taken in response to it. Tracking and recording complaints, including actions undertaken to resolve them. Ensuring that any appropriate action is taken. So for Annie Dookhan, she did have her fellow analyst complain to a supervisor. This complaint they made didn't come out until the whole investigation was underway and her coworkers were interviewed. There was no document that there was a complaint made to a supervisor, even though multiple people said they did complain. There's no description, no tracking, and no action was taken based on their complaint. Their complaint was disregarded and put into the back burner until this case was investigated later on. There was no record of a supervisor reporting and investigating their complaints. There was no description of the complaint or plan to investigate the number of cases Annie was completing, and the laboratory was in extreme non-compliance with this standard. 8.7, corrective actions, option A. 8.7.1, when a nonconformity occurs, the laboratory shall A, react to the nonconformity and act. I don't know what I was trying to say there. I apologize. Take action to control and correct it, address the consequences. B, evaluate the need for action to eliminate the causes of the nonconformity in order that it does not reoccur or occur elsewhere by reviewing and analyzing the nonconformity, determining the causes of the nonconformity, determining if similar nonconformities exist or could potentially occur. The standard is connected to the previous standard 7.9 complaints. Annie Dookhan's laboratory was also in noncompliance with 8.7. There's no action taken on the nonconformities caused by her work until the Massachusetts State Police took over the lab. Again, it was the Massachusetts State, the public health lab of drug abuse. This was a period of time where there was no investigation to see a need for action or gain an understanding of the basis of the nonconformities. Even earlier than June 2011, she was partaking in her breach of protocol and standards, but she again wasn't interviewed until December of 2011. So I was 8 months to a whole year where the lab work was still being resulted out and no one was doing anything. Annie Dookhan still testified until 2012, even though her actions were flagged in June. The lack of consequences, once again, shows the laboratory's disorganization with their management system and noncompliance with ISO standards. No one should be suspended from the lab and also testifying in court on her cases that she's being suspended for, but really doesn't make any sense. Lastly, importance of laboratory governance. In the case of Annie Dookhan, many ISO standards were not followed, and the resulting effects were much greater than the time it would have taken for supervisors to check in on her production of results. Procedures and personnel should abide by standards and policies put forth by accrediting agencies and the management system. In turn, the management system should not allow these inconsistencies to occur throughout the laboratory's production of results. The governance within a forensic laboratory is extremely important due to the relationship with the criminal justice system. Criminals and victims' lives are directly affected by the results produced in one of these facilities. And then my references page. That is the end of that. Thank you.